Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to tonight's episode of the Wednesday Weekly Late Night Party with myself, Zod Ryder, and Robert Meyer Burnett. Unfortunately, we don't have Mikey Sutton tonight because Mikey Sutton has Dreamwalker business to attend to. But tonight is a special night, which is
Ooh,
why
it's a special
Rob
night.
and I decided to still go live tonight because tonight is the series finale of Star Trek Picard.
I have to say I'm sad. It's kind of, for me, this is a journey that's been going on for a long time, because I think I first saw the series this season when it wasn't finished, but I saw it all the way through. And I started, beating the drum. Someone called me the Paul Revere of Star Trek Picard season 3 because I hated Picard seasons 1 and 2.
Yeah, me too.
And and of course there's a bias for me in the sense that I did spend 3 years of my life working on the Star Trek The Next Generation Blu-ray special features, from 2012 through 2014. And I sat down with all the cast multiple times. I hosted on camera a 25th anniversary reunion with everybody. And the Star Trek meant a lot to me. And the thing about Next Generation was, I was in college. I was in the middle of college when it came out, and I had been a lifelong Star Trek fan. I'd started watching Star Trek when I was 5 years old, according to my mother, and it meant so much to me growing up. And Star Trek always changed and evolved as I did. I was 12 years old, so I watched Star Trek from when I was 5 on, and had all the photo novels and read the novels that were out, and had the Mego action figures and built countless models of the Enterprise. And then when I turned 12, Star Trek the Motion Picture came out. And then you had the movies, in the 80s. You had Star Trek 2 in 82, and Star Trek 4 in 80, or Star Trek 3 in 84, and Star Trek 4 in 86. And then in 87, Next Generation came out, and I was now in college. So I've been watching Star Trek and been an uber fan from the time I was 5. Now I'm in college, and there's a whole new Star Trek show. And then for the next 18 years, you had Star Trek 7 years of Next Generation, 7 years of Deep Space Nine, 7 years of Voyager, then 4 years of Enterprise. And there were all the feature films that came out. And so from 1972 to 2005, which is a significant portion of my life, I always had Star Trek growing, evolving, and changing as I did. New characters, new situations, new adventures. And then what happened in the 2009 was the first time they decided to go backwards, to go back and tell the story of Kirk, Spock as young men. It was not Shatner, Nimoy. You're watching other actors play the characters, which was just weird. And Star Trek stopped moving forward. And then we had 3 of those movies, which were, they're trying to turn Star Trek into Star Wars. And then you had, unfortunately, you had, then the new shows were prequels that didn't work canonically with classic Star Trek. Spock suddenly was given a learning disability. And so I call it the Great Star Trek Hostage Crisis that's been happening since 2009. So it surprised me that I loved Star Trek Picard season 3 as much as I did, because I've been a pretty big hater on modern Star Trek. So yeah.
I look back at going to see Star Trek '09 in the theaters and feeling like I wanted to give it a pass because it was the first Star Trek in so long, and like you said, it went backwards, and so I kind of wanted to be a little bit easy on it and give it a chance. But the problem is, Robert, that J.J. Abrams is known at this point as the franchise killer for a reason, and a lot of the problems is that when you look at Star Trek '09, it just didn't make sense to take it to that perspective, to make it more like Star Wars. We don't need Star Trek to be more like Star Wars. We need Star Trek to be true to itself. so that we can continue. Star Trek can continue to evolve. It can continue to become something new. It doesn't have to stay in the same place. And I guess that's my biggest problem with what J.J. Abrams wanted to do just right off the top. The fact that you want to go backwards instead of forwards, and you don't really have anything new to say. And then if that wasn't enough, we get Star Trek Into Darkness, which was like really bad Star Trek Wrath of Khan karaoke.
Yeah, it was, well,
I mean, it was so bad that like, to me, at that point, I was like, well, this is it's over with. If they do anything else here, it's not even going to be worth it, because now we know that they are completely out of ideas if this is what they're deciding to do.
Yeah, I mean, what was really interesting about like, so what they did in Star Trek Into Darkness, they wanted to go back, and there's this fascination to always go back to Wrath of Khan. And what was really interesting to me about Star Trek Into Darkness is the character of Khan Noonien Singh, as he was conceived of, it dealt with things like eugenics. You had human beings that were basically grown in a lab. They were engineered to be supermen, genetic supermen, which is something that went back to the idea of what the Nazis were doing in World War II, kind of monstrous eugenics experiments. And there was talk of eugenics experiments in America because of racial purity. So the idea that they actually succeeded in the Star Trek past and made these genetic supermen, and Khan was the leader of them, and they ended up taking over a quarter of the world, the Middle East, India, and they took over the world because what the scientists forgot was when you create superior people, superior ability, as Spock says, breeds superior ambition. And we've seen it in comics like the X-Men have dealt with this, which also came out of the 60s. So there's a lot of the idea of Homo superior as opposed to Homo sapiens, and Magneto believing that Homo superior, the mutants, we should inherit the earth because we're better. And Xavier said no, because that makes us evil people. So we should not be doing that. And that was, so when Space Seed happened, and Khan is awakened, and at the end of that episode, he's given a world to tame, the genetic Superman that took over the Enterprise. And that was all really interesting. And then in Star Trek 2, you find out a planet blew up, so it ruined that world, and Khan comes back angry because Kirk didn't check on his progress. Well, what was really strange to me about Star Trek Into Darkness was they introduced the character of Khan, and nobody knows who he is. Like, there's a great scene at the beginning of Space Seed when they figure out, they look in the ship's computer, and they're like, Khan, as we discovered him floating in space, was actually Khan Noonien Singh from the 20th century. He took over the world. Well, in Star Trek Into Darkness, it's a really funny moment when Khan says his name. Kirk's he's in jail in the Enterprise. He's in the brig, and they're like, "Who are you?" He goes, "Benedict Cumberbatch, who's not Sikh, who's not Indian. I mean, Montalban was a Mexican, but he could play a could play a convincing Sikh warrior, And when Benedict Cumberbatch says, "I am Khan," the character's like, "Who?"
It meant
Like,
nothing. It meant nothing.
No, it's like, why would they know who he is? You're from 300 years ago.
It was almost like they were trying to break the fourth wall. Like, at that point, Cumberbatch was talking to the audience, like, love what I'm doing here. This is who I'm playing. This is my character. Notice me, notice me, notice me. That's the vibe that I got from it. And when he said, "I am Khan," I did not care. I was just like, what? Like,
it from a storytelling standpoint, it didn't work. And
No.
I think here's the problem. I've been very critical about modern Star Trek for a number of reasons. And the first being, like, if you're a philosophy student, if you're in college and you decide you're going to be a philosophy major or a literature major, one of the things that you do is you delve into the canonical works of philosophy. You go all the way back to the Greeks or the Romans or even before, and you read all the great human philosophy texts over the last 1,000 or 2,000 years. You learn what philosophers before you have said. You have to understand from all over the world. You have to understand what are the basic texts of philosophy, what are what are the foundational principles and who's written about them in the past. You can't be a philosopher without delving into the philosophy of the world. And a lot of where we're at with our IPs, take your pick: James Bond, Doctor Who, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Star Trek, these IPs that are so beloved. They're so beloved. The reason they're beloved is because they have these rich canonical histories of these fake, there's no Hogwarts, but there's a rich lore, and people love lore. Like, if you're an imaginative person and you're reading or watching or experiencing IP in any way, the reason the IP captures you is because of the imaginative worlds that it's conveying to you, and everything that comes along with those worlds. It's the characters, it's the situations, it's the experience of it all. And what makes it appealing is when you have authors like George R.R. Martin writing the history of Westeros, or Tolkien writing the history of Middle Earth. Those places seem real, and that's what makes them live in our imagination. What is frustrating now is the IP holders, the studios, are hiring people that are not well versed in the very IPs that they're making. So what they're trying to do is, and unfortunately, the people that are working in a lot of these IPs are they're not educated. They don't know anything. They haven't watched a lot of the IP. Like, Star Trek is hard because there's hundreds and hundreds of TV episodes. There's all kinds of books and comics and reference manuals. But if you're not going to delve into that stuff, like Nicholas Meyer didn't know anything about Star Trek when he started on Star Trek 2, but he had 79 episodes of the show, which back then was doable. You could watch 79 episodes over a couple weeks if you wanted to. And as a classicist, as Nicholas Meyer was, very smart guy, and came from an artistic family, he made movies before. He understood what makes classical storytelling, and he took the character of Khan from the episode Space Seed and made it more of a Moby Dick type of a story. Little Melville and Horatio Hornblower, which is those series of books, is what inspired Roddenberry. So it's not difficult to see how Star Trek works. And yet, over the course of with Kurtzman Star Trek and Kurtzman began in Star Trek 09, they've always wanted to turn Star Trek into something else. And every time they do that, they lose. Doctor Who, they changed the origin of the Doctors. Why? Because they wanted to add, I have no problem with anybody. I don't care if you're people of color. I don't care if you're women. I don't care if you're straight, gay, pink, polka dot. It doesn't matter. Give me a great story with great characters. And if somebody's sexuality or their religious preferences or whatever are part of that character, great, write that. I want to experience that. I want to meet people I've never met before. I want to meet characters I haven't met before. But if you're working in IP that's existed for 50 years, it's not your right to go and fundamentally change the characters that somebody else created. I mean, if you want to continue on with them and live up to the spirit of those characters, I think that's great. But if you go back and start retconning these characters, you're overstepping, I think. I think you're overstepping. So when you say that Spock had this long-lost sister that made him the man he is today, or then you saddle him with a learning disability, you're pandering to an audience. And what's really strange, when I was growing up as a kid, I didn't want to see myself reflected in anything. I knew who I was. I knew who my friends were. I wanted to see, the reason I loved stories, and whether I read a lot of books, whether it was books or movies or TV shows, I like seeing stories about people that I was not. I wanted to meet people I didn't know. I wanted to meet people that didn't look like me. They didn't sound like me. They might not have believed what I believed, because I already knew what I believed. I didn't need to see myself reflected back. I wanted to meet people that I didn't know and might not ever know. And that's what made great entertainment. And what's so strange to me is Star Trek as a phenomenon was always a niche franchise. When it first started, it appealed to college kids. It appealed to the nerdy ones in us. And in the 60s, Tolkien was really big as well. And a lot of counterculture fantasy and sci-fi writers were people like Robert Heinlein, who wrote about things like free love in the 60s. And a lot of this stuff was very fringe and very counterculture. And Star Trek was part of that. Star Trek was never mainstream. It held on in the ratings. And now what they're trying to do is Paramount has a franchise like Transformers. Michael Bay's Transformers movies make $1 billion. In their minds, why doesn't Star Trek make $1 billion? Well, because Star Trek is niche. It's always been a little niche. It's never been, it's not a giant 4-quadrant rousing adventure for the family that everyone's going to go out to see.
That's amazing though. When you say it like that, every true Star Trek fan understands that.
Yeah.
But the executives will never get that, and this is why the general audience never gels towards it no matter what, because the thing is, it's like, okay, like Star Trek 09, JJ Trek. Yeah, you kind of got a little bit of the general audience on board because you punched it up a little bit, but by doing that, you kind of alienated the people that are always going to support the franchise, the people that want something that's more thought-provoking, that's going to make them ponder the future and ask all these intellectual questions, which with regards to who we are, where we've been, and where we're going. So there's a lot of things about Star Trek that you lose when you try to make it into something that it's not. You try to turn it into something else and just punch it up, for the general audience. And it's not that I don't think that the general audience can, handle, Star Trek in the way that us as fans appreciate Star Trek. But it's one of those things that it has to be on TV, and it has to be well written, and it has to have enough in there for everybody to gravitate towards. And unfortunately, executives, they just cannot find the balance. And Kurtzman, no matter what he's doing, I don't know. You mentioned, about pandering, and I still to this day do not know who Star Trek Discovery is for, because regular, TV watchers are not watching Discovery.
No.
Die-hard Star Trek fans like us are not watching Discovery. Activists who are not fans of anything are not watching Star Trek Discovery. So that small audience of people that you are pandering towards, who are basically activists for something, are not contributing to your bottom line and are not helping you financially. So what's the point of doing that? Why not just put Star Trek back where it's supposed to be and allow it to appeal to its niche market? Because at the end of the day, you will be more successful. And that's what I've never understood.
Well, I think that we live in a strange time. I think with the rise of social media, it used to be that if you were a fan of movies, or if you were just a fan of literature, whatever you were a fan of sports, what you'd have to do is, it was about looking outside yourself. And when you were a fan, like I had to, if I wanted a Star Trek novel, there was no Amazon. I had to get on a bus. When I was a kid, before I could drive, I was taking multiple buses to go to the comic book store to buy my comic books every week. It was a big deal. And I knew that, okay, after school, I would look forward to it. I'd go down. At first it was Wednesday. Yeah, it was mostly Wednesdays. And you'd get new comics and you'd have to go get them. And like, I would order books at, like, when I found out, like, there's a new Stephen King novel. I remember when Firestarter came out, I took Firestarter and I was reading it in line to see Empire Strikes Back in 1980, and it was awesome. And you had to go get these things, and there was real effort. So, and when you would get a book or you'd get a comic or something, you would puzzle over it and you'd read the comic like 10 times before you bagged and boarded it. You had to know, you had to understand, like, X-Men comics were dense, man. Chris Claremont X-Men comics were dense. And nowadays, everything comes to you. There's no effort made. You can stream things, you can see them whatever you want. Before, if you didn't see it when it was first aired, before VCRs, you lost it, man. And I think now, and what's really interesting is, because the world we live in, you can find affirmation. Everybody wants to be affirmed all the time.
Yes.
And so they're waiting for things to come and give them that affirmation. And a lot of people's identities, for instance, are wrapped up in the things that they like. And if you criticize, like I'm a huge outspoken critic of modern Star Trek. And I've seen this happen just over the last couple of days, if I come out and say something about Star Trek, about how or make fun of it or say something, it immediately, there's a group of people on Twitter, especially Star Trek fans, that don't like me at all. They will come at me with personal attacks. I never personally attack people.
But are they? Here's my question to you, Rob. Are they Star Trek fans? Because if they're attacking you,
well, they don't know
you are a Star Trek fan, and they obviously don't know who you are or
right.
how far back you go or what your association with Star Trek actually is. That's the biggest problem with a lot of these people. It's like
I can't expect them to know anything about me. But what I find interesting is their first inclination is to go after you and brand you something, whether it's a bigot. Today I was called a cockroach, a bigot, a homophobe, like all this stuff. And it was by somebody who blocks me. So I can't even see what he's saying. Somebody,
I love that. I have a lot of those too. They love to block you so that you can't see what they've said, but they still have a lot to say about you. It's like you live rent free in their head, and you're wondering, well, if you still have all this to say about me, why don't you just unblock me so that we can have an actual conversation instead of you just, speaking to your echo chamber? I mean, it's essentially all it is.
I always invite people. I'm like, as people know, I'm like, come on my show. We'll talk about it. I won't bite your head off. If you want to call me these things, do it to my face.
Yeah.
I do it to people's faces.
Indeed.
I don't hide behind an avatar. I'm me. I post on, I don't have any aliases on physical media or on social media at all.
You do have an alias. You're William Riker, but people just don't know. They just aren't aware of the time travel. So we got to keep that quiet. Got a $5 super chat here from Fry Minis. He says, just got back from the IMAX screening. Absolutely blown away. I wish I could have seen it in IMAX. That post-credit scene has me hyped. Also in love with Seven's arc. Metalis is the man. Well,
he certainly is. What's really interesting is the reason that I loved Picard season 3 so much is there's a lot of people that can pick it apart and say it's Star Trek's greatest hits. But what they're not getting is, I thought the character stuff in it, how everybody acted.
There was actual character growth.
And absolutely. And real, as I have grown up with Star Trek Picard season 3 touched on a lot of things I'm feeling now at this point in my life. And I liked the story of it all. I liked the Tom Clancy. Look, remember, Star Trek is a show that introduced us to Greek gods who were aliens, and it gave us Nazi planet in Patterns of Force. It gave us Chicago mobs of the 20s in the episode of Piece of the Action. I mean, there's a lot of goofy pulp sci-fi action adventure in Star Trek, and yet at the same time, there's also a lot of great, very serious human stories. And this kind of was a combination of the two. You had sort of a grand pulp techno thriller sci-fi story that goes all the way back to the beginnings of Next Generation, and certainly reflects back on Picard. People that know about Batman's relationship with the Joker might use that as a metaphor for Star Trek Picard season 3, and they wouldn't be too far off. I mean, when you have these longtime rivals, it's important that it's interesting to see where people have come in their lives. And I think Star Trek Picard season 3 had a lot of very valid human things to say about our characters and where our characters are now. And it was very hopeful. It was very meaningful to me, and I quite enjoyed it. And yet there's a lot of people that are like, man, this sucks and it's stupid. I'm like, okay, I don't know what you're looking for out of Star Trek, but Star Trek, there's a wide gamut of stories that are being told. What are you looking for? I don't know.
And that's the thing that always will confuse me with regards to this, because if you're going to say that Star Trek Picard is just Star Trek's greatest hits, what can you say about Star Trek Discovery or Strange New Worlds or the first 2 seasons of Picard? Is any new ground being covered on any of those shows?
Well,
Not really.
Also, what I would say about the problem with modern Star Trek is Star Trek at its finest is action adventure, allegorical stories that, even though they're presenting stories in a science fiction action adventure context, have something to say to us as the audience about our lives today.
Yes.
But they do it allegorically. And what Star Trek has forgotten, because I think people don't know how to do this anymore, is tell an allegorical story. Like, what is an allegory? You know, when I'll give you an example. I use this all the time, and I'll use it again. So in the 50s and 60s, there was very strict standards on television where you could, there was subject matter you just couldn't address. Like, you couldn't, if in movies, you couldn't show a married couple sleeping in the same bed, for instance. There always had to be 2 different beds in the room. That was part of standards, like the Hays Code. It seems silly, but you had to do that. So, for instance, on TV, on network TV, and Star Trek originally aired on NBC, during the 60s, you could not address the Vietnam War within the context of a drama. You couldn't do that. You couldn't make political. So no matter what the show was, whether it was a sitcom or whether it was a serious drama, the Vietnam War was a subject you couldn't discuss. Well, Star Trek did an episode in the 2nd season called A Private Little War, where there was a planet that had villagers and it had hill people. And Kirk had once been stationed on this planet. And he knew Tyree, the head of the hill people. And in this, the Klingons were giving arms, like rifles, to the village people to take care of their hill people problem. And so the Federation rolls up and Tyree's people are being killed. So the Federation, Kirk's like, well, we'll supply you with arms as well, which was a direct connection to what was going on between communists in Indochina and what the United States was doing with the South Vietnamese. And so, do I really look like Philip Seymour Hoffman? Like, I want to look like how Philip Seymour Hoffman looked as Lester Bangs in Almost Famous. But so Star Trek does a story about Vietnam, but through the prism of a science fiction action adventure show. So network standards and practices don't even know it's about Vietnam. The audience does. Smart audience members do. But they got away with it because that's not Vietnam, man. That's an alien planet out in space. And so suddenly the astute viewers know, they're like, wow, man, I get it. And that's what the great science fiction fantasy television of the 50s and 60s was able to do. Rod Serling in The Twilight Zone. How many Twilight Zone episodes are allegories for stuff going on in our real world? But he got away with it because, hey, man, that's not, the network would complain or something, but that's the Twilight Zone. That's not our world.
Exactly. See? And I mean, on the side note for the Twilight Zone, I go back and forth between, Serling's original, because I absolutely love it, and the 1980s adaptation. Because my God, if you go back and you watch that 1980s version of the Twilight Zone today, it still hits. It's still really great.
There is so many, well, again, because you had writers like Harlan Ellison writing those scripts. There's A Message from Charity or Her Pilgrim Soul or Nightcrawlers, or even a trifle like Joe Dante's Shadow Man.
Yes.
I am the Shadow Man, and I will never harm the person under whose bed I live. That's one of my favorite things ever.
That always reminded me, you know what? That voice always reminded me of the voice from the Sinistar arcade game.
I love that game.
I mean,
and those Twilight Zone episodes are on like YouTube.
They're great.
And you can, like, William Friedkin, one of my favorites, William Friedkin, who directed The Exorcist, directed an episode called Nightcrawlers about like a Vietnam vet who got messed up, and so the visions that he's dreaming about come true, like he manifests he manifests them. I love Son of a Woman.
Yeah,
Son of a
very
Woman.
good, very good film.
I'm gonna take a flamethrower to this place. I love that movie.
Very good film. Very good film. Didn't Scent of a Woman get a Criterion release not too long ago?
No, but it did get a special edition. But
Okay, I must have confused it because I for some reason I either thought that it got a Criterion or thought that there was one coming at some point. I don't know, but
what
it
is
fits.
a bad? I love
It fits.
Pacino. What is
Yes.
a bad man? He's so good.
Yeah, remember Beware I Live. Yes, there you go. Run, coward. Sinistar.
Sinistar was so. I love Sinistar, and that voice was great. I was a little bit more subdued with my Shadow Man voice, but the end of that episode, and the kid's like, "Yeah." When the Shadow Man's like, "I am the Shadow Man, and I will never harm the person under whose bed I live." And the kid's like, "Yeah," and he says, "But I am a Shadow Man from under someone else's bed." And the kid's like, "Oh no." And that's the end of the episode. Love that.
The great Trek writers had some trials and life experience. More so than modern writers.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, a lot of them they all fought in World War II. James Doohan lost fingers. Scotty was missing fingers. You never really saw it in the show, but he was, I believe James Doohan was on the beaches at Normandy.
I think so.
I
remember hearing
Roddenberry was a pilot, and so these guys are, and now, I mean, I feel that there's also so much great TV writing, whether it's Succession or House of the Dragon or Better Call Saul or Yellow Jackets. I mean, take your pick. We live in a golden age of great TV writing, and yet Star Trek does not get those writers because Kurtzman and his merry band of pranksters, they're not at that level. They came from the Xena and Hercules school, which is fine, but I think that Star Trek needs to be written by people that I mean, you want to see a graphic example, watch Brian Fuller's Hannibal and watch what Kurtzman did with Clarice, the Clarice Starling show. Because Hannibal, Brian Fuller couldn't get the rights to Silence of the Lambs. And then Alex Kurtzman got Silence of the Lambs. And you can see the difference. Fuller basically got kicked off his own show because of a lot of upfront costs. And Brian Fuller's a perfectionist and he can be a pain in the ass. And then Kurtzman took it over. And you can see the graphic example. Look at the 3 seasons of Brian Fuller's Hannibal. Some of the greatest horror television ever made. And then go look at the failed season of Kurtzman's Clarice, which was one of the worst TV pilots I ever read.
Is Hannibal Lecter in it?
No, they didn't have the rights to Hannibal Lecter. They only had the rights to Silence of the Lambs, to the character of Clarice Starling.
So then what was Kurtzman's point? I mean, why?
You know what? Who knows? He robbed us of the 4th. They could have done a 4th season of Hannibal, but oh well.
Yeah, I mean, Hannibal was great. I enjoyed it. I was enjoying that show. And, Brian Fuller, you could tell that he was on top of it and he understood the characters. And I really, because for me, I think back to the original Manhunter film.
Oh yeah.
And I got vibes from that when I was watching Fuller's Hannibal.
Oh, it was, I mean, that was the first time we met Will Graham.
Yeah.
And Brian Cox is the first. I mean, it's so funny that Logan Roy, who, the villain of Succession, was also the very first Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah.
Which is great. Have you ever seen Blood in the Moonlight, Will? It looks quite black. It's so good.
Yeah. What about the Outer Limits episode Soldier that inspired the Terminator? Yeah.
Yeah, this definitely Soldier and another episode called Demon with a Glass Hand. Yeah, Harlan Ellison, he won his suit against, he had to get mentioned on the Terminator credits, but it makes sense. I mean, guys, we all grew up watching that stuff. And I don't think whether it was Outer Limits, whether it was Twilight Zone, Star Trek, UFO, Space 1999. I mean, The Prisoner. Take your pick. There was a lot of there's only a finite amount of these shows that existed, so they were hugely influential for those people who liked watching them.
What did you think? And I wanted to ask you about this tonight before I forget that Harlan Ellison had written a biography about his writing about City on the Edge of Forever and Star Trek, and I had read it in hardcover many years ago, and I had recently gone back and listened to the audiobook version of it where Harlan Ellison narrates it himself.
Yeah.
And I just was struck by the amount of snark and bitterness that Harlan Ellison had towards Gene Roddenberry in that book. And I felt kind of bad because I'm like, Harlan Ellison was a genius when it comes to writing and all the ways he looked at things, and he was brilliant. And I felt bad because I'm like, man, whatever we may think about, Gene Roddenberry, it's hard to look at Gene Roddenberry in such a negative light in the way in which he was portrayed through Harlan Ellison's book. I felt so bad reading it. I was like, wow.
Well, I mean, look,
the
thing about Gene Roddenberry was definitely a product of his time.
Sure.
He was a madman, the same way you saw the hard drinking, philandering products of the time in which he grew up. The
Don Draper.
Gene Roddenberry was the Don Draper of Hollywood, I guess. But there was a lot of people that were like that. I mean, culture was very different. And Harlan Ellison was, obviously he was an iconoclast, but he was a real believer, but he was also a guy that he would get in his own way. He was an incredible writer, but he would procrastinate, and like all great artists do. And I think here's another thing. Here's another reason why I very much dislike Star Trek Discovery. So Harlan Ellison's City on the Edge of Forever script, which is one of the greatest episodes of Star Trek, was heavily rewritten. The script does not resemble the script that Harlan Ellison wrote, because no one could. Scotty was dealing drugs on the Enterprise. I mean, it was like it would have ruined the show. However, on Star Trek Discovery, because the writers are so cool, they went back to his original script, which was adapted by IDW Comics. And I'm sure they just read the IDW Comics. And they brought in the Guardian of Forever that Harlan Ellison created, and they made it the original version where the Guardian could turn into a human being and be ambulatory and go places. And
wait, who did this?
The writers on Discovery.
Oh, on Discovery. Yeah. I don't know. I haven't been watching it.
Well, they brought back the Guardian of Forever, but like in his original script, the Guardian could take human form.
Yeah.
And go places. And which is, okay, stupid. The way the Guardian was presented, it was an artifact from a long dead civilization. And you kind of got the idea, because we saw this in Star Trek occasionally, that that if there was going to be a planetary catastrophe and you had a way to travel through time, the population would go back into its own past or something and go live out their days. You also saw that in the third season, the penultimate episode of Star Trek called All Our Yesterdays. There was a planet, Sarpedon, that was going to blow up. The sun was going to go nova and destroy the planet. And they created this thing called the Atavachron, where everybody could go back into the planet's past and live there. So when the planet blew up, they would be in the planet's past, and they would live on. So there was a lot that went on a couple of times in Star Trek, but Harlan Ellison's original script had the Guardian of Forever being able to be turned into a person, which didn't work. And in Star Trek lore, but the people that wrote for Discovery are like, we're going to be cool, man. We're going to go back and we're going to take Harlan Ellison's original script and we're going to turn that into an episode. It's like, it just didn't work. The Guardian of Forever can just move all over the place. In Star Trek lore and the novels and the comics, the Guardian planet became a big deal. You
Yeah.
saw it was later used in the animated series Yesteryear, in the episode Yesteryear, and
Oh, I love that episode.
it's great.
Brilliantly done.
It's great, you know, and they, but if the Guardian of Forever can turn into Paul Guilfoyle and wander the Brass from CSI, that's who played him. If you're gonna wander around and he can just be like Doctor Who, I mean, it was a total Doctor Who ripoff, but make it like Harlan's original script, and they thought they were being cool. I'm like, you disrespectful motherfucker. Fuck you. I'm like, and that's what I hate. They're because they want to make their own imprinteur. I get it. You know, you want to have your own thing, but then create your own IP, man. If you're going to work in someone else's IP, work in their IP. Don't try and change it and bend it to your will.
Exactly.
Honor the IP and honor the people that create it. If you're the custodian of an IP, make the IP as great as it can be. Don't sit there and, again, don't bring your agenda. Don't bring, and that's the problem. Everybody wants to turn these IPs into their own thing. And I'm like, go create an IP. That's the hardest thing in the world to do. And as a longtime fan who's been watching this show, Star Trek turns 57 in September. As a franchise, it turns 57 years old. And a lot of the people that are working on Star Trek have never watched all the episodes. And yet they're writing them.
And they can't be bothered to do that because it doesn't interest them. It's like you said, again, it's about agenda and inserting personal beliefs and personal politics into these programs and pushing that. And I don't understand why, when you look at something like Star Trek was always a very progressive type of thing. It was always very much in the weeds about what was going on in current times.
Well, Star Trek did a lot of things I've been talking about a lot lately, but Star Trek would cast, for instance, black actors in positions of power. Like there's an episode called Court Martial where Kirk he's accused of making a horrible mistake on the job during an ion storm and killing one of his crew members, Ben Finney. And he goes to a star base and he's put on trial. And they have the great Percy Rodriguez, a black Canadian actor who has an incredible voice. He's a black man who's a Commodore who outranks Kirk. Now, no one said anything. They just cast Percy Rodriguez. You know, they cast him in a role where he outranks Kirk, and Kirk's fate is in his hands. Now, you can talk about Nichelle Nichols, and it was amazing they put her on the bridge of the Enterprise. But if you look what they did to have Percy Rodriguez come in and outrank Kirk and put him on trial, that was truly progressive, because you're taking your white hero and putting his fate in Percy Rodriguez's hands. And that was something they never talk about that when you read about Star Trek. Or Richard Daystrom, the man who created the duotronic circuit that all starships ran on, was played by the great William Marshall, another fantastic black actor who later went and got fame in the Blackula movies.
Yes.
But they cast him as the guy who created the circuits that all starships flew on. And what were they going to say? But Star Trek was casting strong black men as very successful, capable people that in some cases were smarter than or outranked their white counterparts. And in 1966, that was a big deal. But nobody cared because it was the future and it was Star Trek, so they could get away with it. Yeah. And
it's like the points that you were making about it's not happening in our world. It's happening in the future, in some futuristic utopian universe. So therefore you can't take it seriously. It's just TV. It's just entertainment.
Well, that's how the makers of Star Trek got away with it.
Yeah.
You know, and with God bless them for doing so.
So according to the new Strange New Worlds trailer, Kirk is incapable of using a revolving door, and Spock can't say a head warp 2 when in command. Hard pass for me. I got to agree with you, Austin. I think that Strange New Worlds, my thing with Strange New Worlds was I was excited at first because I did like, the idea of Anson Mount taking over as Captain Pike. I thought he fit the Jeffrey Hunter mold very, very nicely. And I thought that, I mean, and no offense to Bruce Greenwood. He was a great actor, but he was completely wrong for Christopher Pike.
Although I thought his performance, when he says your father was captain of a starship for 12 minutes.
Yeah.
I dare you to do better. I mean, that was my favorite thing.
That was a good line. Yeah. But, I mean, I feel like they're squandering the potential they have with these good actors because, again, it's not like Anson Mount doesn't have the acting chops to play a good, convincing Captain Pike. It's that the material they're giving him is absolutely ridiculous.
It's garbage. I mean, and they've bamboozled people. Look, that trailer for Strange New Worlds, I on the heels of Star Trek Picard season 3, I just shake my head and be like, this is because here's the thing. What has happened with a lot of our IPs, and Strange New Worlds might be the perfect example of this. There is a pop culture sense memory of what an IP is to the general public, not to the fans who really watch it, but to the general public. Like if you ask my mom, my 84-year-old mom, if you asked her, and she's been going to Star Trek movies with me, she's listened to me talk about Star Trek my entire life, she would be able to tell you about Tribbles, about the Mugatu, the giant lizard man. That's how people know Star Trek. No one who's making TV now. Akiva Goldsman will tell you, well, I was younger and going to Star Trek conventions. And no one takes Star Trek seriously from the early days. Nobody takes the original series seriously at all. So again, they think what they're going to do is Strange New Worlds is basically Guardians of the Galaxy. They want to put that stupid humor. The funny thing is the Guardians of the Galaxy humor is earned and funny. But when you have Kirk get hung up in a revolving door like you see in that trailer, Kirk is a student of history. He's not an idiot. If he was faced with a revolving door, he'd just stand there and wait until somebody went through if he didn't know how to do it and feel like, oh, okay, I get it. And here's the thing.
He's not Captain Kirk. That actor is not Captain Kirk. I don't care what they try to say.
No. And he's like the anti-Kirk in a way. But here's the thing about Star Trek. Star Trek never made fun of its characters. It never, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. There are two overtly totally comedic episodes of the original series. There's Trouble with Tribbles and A Piece of the Action, when everyone's dressed up as gangsters. There's a scene where Kirk gets behind the wheel of a stick shift 1920s automobile, and he can't drive it. He's lurching forward, and it's a funny scene. But Spock turns to him and says, Captain, you're an excellent starship commander, but as a taxi driver, you leave much to be desired. Now, this is a joke that is not at Kirk's expense. Of course, he doesn't know how to drive a car from the 20th century. He's never done it before. And when Spock makes this comment, it doesn't make Kirk stupid, but it's genuinely funny. When you see our characters, and they do this all the time, in this trailer, they do it twice. They make Kirk a buffoon, and then this whole idea is like, do you have your catchphrase, Spock? The camera pushes in, go fast. And we all guffaw at it. Let's make the funny, and Strange New Worlds is a show about a hot, handsome daddy and his crew of young, upstart chicks that go around the galaxy with him. I mean, it's such a weird.
Baywatch in space.
But the funny thing is that he doesn't get to touch them. His lover, his girlfriend's not on the ship. So right. It's such a bizarre. They have a real opportunity to tell great stories. Strange New Worlds is the Vegas showgirl version of Star Trek. If you went and saw Star Trek live on a stage in Las Vegas at the Venetian or at the Wynn, that's what you would see. And yeah, one of the great lines in Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home is when Gillian Taylor says, well, you're from outer space. He's like, no, I'm from Iowa.
I only
work in outer space. That is real humor. It's character-based humor, but it doesn't denigrate. They never denigrated the characters in Star Trek. And modern Star Trek denigrates. They make jokes at the expense of the characters all the time. That is bad humor, and that is bad Star Trek.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely. Michelle Yeoh has been massively wasted, as was Jason Isaacs. Yeah, they get quality actors for Strange New Worlds and Star Trek Discovery. They just don't know what to do with those actors because they don't have writers who understand Star Trek or want to understand Star Trek and be able to write it effectively in ways that you're going to be able to accepted as Star Trek. Whereas Star Trek Picard, that's being made fun of and being called, Star Trek's greatest hits, is doing everything right to
well,
win back the people who feel disillusioned. But my only issue is with this, Rob, because I'm with you 100% on season 3. This they're not taking advantage of the goodwill that they're getting from season 3. They're going to continue to make the crap that they were making that got them in this place in the first place.
To be fair, like Discovery season 5 wrapped a long time ago.
Yeah.
And Strange New Worlds was greenlit. Star Trek Picard only had 3 seasons.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. There's no if you're a Secret Hideout and you control the Star Trek franchise and you get to make whatever you want, why would Alex Kurtzman ever give anyone else control? The only reason that Terry Matalas got to produce Star Trek Picard season 3 was that Alex Kurtzman went to do his sequel to The Man Who Fell to Earth, which was the David Bowie film based on the Walter Tevis novel that Nicholas Roeg made in the mid-70s. So he did a sequel to that. People are probably going, wait, what? It starred Chiwetel Ejiofor. It's actually not bad, but that's what he went off and did.
It's probably the best thing that Kurtzman himself has ever been involved in.
I agree.
To tell you the truth, I mean,
I agree.
When you really look at it, because I went back and watched it based on your recommendation because you said it was pretty good, and I was like, okay, well, I have yet to really see anything from Kurtzman that impresses me, so I wanted to check this out. And I have to say, yeah, he didn't do a horrible job.
No,
it's just that the problem is now CBS and Paramount have to continue to distract Kurtzman with other things so that they can allow Star Trek to be a successful franchise again.
Well, yeah, and the funny thing is again, they keep trying to make Star Trek appeal to everybody. Let's make animated shows for the kids. Let's do a workplace comedy. To me, I can't watch Lower Decks because it seems to me that the writers are saying, hey, we've watched every episode of Star Trek. Look at all the references we're putting in. Ha ha. And to me, it's like, I get them all. I understand but just tell me a good story, man. And it's animated. Prodigy is interesting. I don't dislike Prodigy, but when it really comes down to it, we live in a time where we live in a science fiction world. Our world that we live in with the rise of AI and medical bioethics, global warming, climate change, whatever, our weird political situations, the time has never been better to make great Star Trek than it is now in terms of allegorical science fiction. But you need really smart, great writers. And when you're hiring the person who made the new Nancy Drew TV series to showrun Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and I don't mean to be disparaging against her, but it's like, really, that's who you're going to hire to make a new Star Trek show? And they're like, Star Trek Starfleet Academy is going to be about first loves, rivalries, and I'm like, what? Anyway.
I am glad right now that you mentioned AI because there's something I want to show you and the audience, and I want to get your view on this. I don't know if you had a chance to see this or not. Might be new to a lot of the audience, but this is a trailer that was made by AI a little while ago, made entirely with with a couple of AI programs. ChatGPT and Midjourney AI, and it's and I feel like this is something that we can discuss since you mentioned AI. So let's play this here and see what
as someone who possesses extraordinary abilities, it would be easy for me to become disillusioned with humanity. I have seen the worst that people can do, and it would be easy to conclude that we are not worth saving. But I refuse to give in to that kind of thinking. I've seen the worst of what humanity can do. I've seen them tear each other apart, destroy the world they live in, and hurt the people they love. But I've also seen the glimmer of hope, the possibility of redemption. I know that there are people out there who are worth fighting for. People who are struggling to make a difference, who are trying to make the world a better place.
This heroic act is just the latest in a long line of feats by the Man of Steel.
And moments ago, he was seen rescuing a group of civilians from a burning building.
They're the reason I keep going. The reason I keep fighting. Even when it seems like there's no hope left. They are the reason Jor-El sent me here. They are the reason I am Superman.
You will learn to fear me, Kryptonian.
All right. So I got to get your view on this. This is AI. This is where we're headed.
Oh, dude. Well,
Burnett.
Here's what's going to happen 5 years from now. People are going to be able to make their own movies. You know, they'll be able to probably create a 2-hour film however they want with anyone who they ever wanted starring in them. And we will sit down and watch them, and we will be sharing all of these things. And we're going to be so obsessed with the fact that no longer do you need cameras or crews or whatever. You can just use prompts and your own ideas, and people are going to make their own movies.
Studios are done.
Well, I would say this though. The problem is that I do believe that you still, and with AI, there's going to be a leveling out of the level of talent. It'll probably be in the middle. But I do think that we're eventually going to get tired of watching computer-generated people, because the reason that we like watching movies is subconsciously we know those are real people in the movies, and they're doing their best to convey real human emotion. But if we're watching a medium that is entirely generated by a computer, I think people will subconsciously, it might not even be conscious, they'll turn away from it and they'll go somewhere else. Because if you can make anything happen and be like, well, you know, I'd love to see Christopher Reeve and George Reeves and Kirk Allen from the original the original Superman serial in the 40s or whatever. You can team up all the Superman and put them in a movie. If you can do all of that via AI, then it's not special, and people are going to be like, whatever. It's not going to be
adapt. Cool. One of the things I was thinking is we could literally take the original DC Comics run of Star Trek comics back in the day when we had all these great Star Trek stories that were done as comics. We could literally take those comic books, use those comic books, and tell AI to turn these comic books into episodes of original Star Trek. I mean, it's going to be incredible.
It's going to happen. I mean, it's as a matter of fact, it's an inevitability, and we're going to get there. The real question is, do you want to watch that stuff? You know, do you want to watch things? And I honestly believe, I've said this before, I believe that personal authenticity, real human interaction, is going to be the currency of the 21st century. You know, why did YouTube become successful? Why are people watching us right now? I think that the currency of YouTube is authenticity. No one
Yes.
watches people they think are full of shit.
Mm-hmm.
They watch people because they believe in them. And the reason you get an audience on YouTube is if people like you and they agree with you, or they feel like they want to be your friend and hang out with you. And if they live on the other side of the planet, they might not ever get to hang out with you. Watching a live stream is the next best thing, and that's one of the things I love about YouTube is seeing people I've never met before.
Yeah.
I was contacted today, I'll give you an example, by a husband and wife team that I didn't know. And one of them works in the video game industry, and they make these videos on YouTube that I'd never seen before. And they're so well done. And the wife is the front person. She's this incredibly beautiful woman, and she's very funny. And they said, look, no one's watching our videos, and we've been watching you for years. We'd love it could we collab? You've always talked about putting shows on your network. And I'm like, I watch these videos and I'm like, wow, these guys are great. I looked at their work. I'm like, no one's watching their videos. I'm like, you guys do the production is amazing. And I'm like, it would be my honor to host because I want to build the Burnett work. My YouTube
it's
to be a network.
Brilliant.
I want 12 hours of original programming a day, and it can't just be me talking. But to get other people and doing production, I mean, tomorrow the 12th episode of the Otaku Experience drops, and
that's some good stuff too, by the way.
And you know what?
Shout out to you for putting that on the Burnett work, because it's decent stuff.
But Israel, 20-year-old kid,
yeah,
busts his ass, incredibly smart, does a tremendous job. He reaches out to me. How can I not sit there and go, because I love anime, I mean, and put him on the show? It was a no-brainer. All I said to him was like, I want to put it on every day, Thursday at 2:00 every week. If you get it out and you make it consistent, tomorrow is his 12th week of doing it consistently. To produce anything on a regular basis like that's laudable. And I'm so proud of that kid. I've never actually met him in person. He came on the John Campea show, and he's a really smart kid. He busts his ass. He works with his father doing construction and things like that. And when he asked me to do it and I saw his show, I'm like, fuck yeah, dude, I'll put that shit on. And what I want to do is I've always said, let's create a channel that's like an ongoing science fiction convention. If that's what 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, that's a tall order.
It's beautiful
programming.
And it's a vision, I have to say.
Yeah. But what I want to do, the mission statement is ultimately, let's celebrate human creativity in all of its myriad forms. I want to have books. I'll talk to authors, talk to fine artists, cover the whole gamut of human endeavor,
especially in the age of AI that we are headed towards. This is a compelling topic. When we can just, like you've pointed out, this trailer is showing you, is just giving you a taste of where things are headed and what it could be. You need human creativity and human authenticity more than ever now.
Well, that is, I mean, if there's a Star Trek message in all of this, that's the message. Human endeavor, human artistic achievement, human imagination. Because remember, AI can only do things that we've told it to do. It can't think.
See, that's the problem though. It's gonna if you follow what some scientists are saying, it's going to exceed us. It's going to become its own thing, and some believe that it actually already has. So it's I don't know.
I think you're right. I mean, it will, but it'll become its own thing. But what's going to be interesting is that humanity, when AI becomes sentient, and what Ray Kurzweil called this singularity, when AI becomes self-aware, that means human beings are gods. Human beings have created, it might be a digital life form, but we have given rise to consciousness that's self-aware.
Yeah.
And I honestly believe that smart AI would understand that and be like, wow, Well, if we can facilitate humanity coming up with something else because we can't conceive of something like that, I mean,
would we not be better off eventually as a lot of how about the Carol Burnett work? That would be interesting.
Cheers to you.
Maybe an AI can do it. Human and machines living as one. Now this is an interesting thing because according to some, the only way that humans are going to be able to survive and able to thrive in a future where AI is the dominant intelligence, humans are going to have to merge with AI in some way. So do you think that we're going to get to that point where, because they've already started creating chips that we'll put in our brains that will allow us to basically communicate with AI and have instant access to the internet and all that right in our heads? I mean, where do you think all this is headed, Rob? I mean, science fiction has come to reality.
I think all that's look, here's what I would love to see. Like, I don't know if I'll make it this far in terms of my life, but if someone said at the end of my life, if I could download my consciousness into, say, the mainframe of a generational starship where I would exist digitally in the mainframe of a computer of a ship that's going to take, to get to another planet or another star system, it's going to take 250 years. But for me, my consciousness in the mainframe of this computer, I exist in a virtual recreation of the world, so I could travel around the planet. And I perceive myself as being in a human body. And I could spend the next 250 years working on myself, and it's like being in the Matrix.
Yeah.
And yet, when it comes to, I have to do duties every day where I have to go in to make sure the ship's doing all right. So I'm going to live as an avatar after my human body is gone. Bring that shit on, son.
I think there was a Black Mirror episode like that.
Oh yeah.
Where they were to the point where you could literally download the consciousness from a person, and it would be your actual consciousness, not a copy of your consciousness, but your actual consciousness. And then you would have the ability to, again, live in an avatar in this virtual world where you could literally do anything you wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's San Junipero. There was that was a Black Mirror episode where people could live in different times, and if you were
right, you could go to the 80s,
Yep.
You could go to the 90s, you could go to the 50s, you could do
one of the greatest. I mean, that should have been a Star Trek episode.
Yes,
that was a fantastic episode of science fiction television. But that's what I'm saying. I mean, I would love that. I would love if digital technology could extend. Imagine if I knew, imagine this. Imagine if biotechnology or whatever could allow a human being to live for 1,000 years. Imagine how you would think about our lifespan now. The first 20 years of our lives is basically a wash. We're going to school, we're learning. We don't know who we are, trying to figure that shit out. In the 20s, we basically are exploring. We come out of college or not. Trade schools, we're young adults, we're figuring out who we are. By the time we get to our 30s, we're like, okay, this is what I want to do. I'm pursuing my goals. And so from the 30s through your 60s, so for 35 years, you can work, you can get married, you can have kids, become parents, do whatever you want to do. So, and then after 65, you got maybe 20 years left of life if you live to be 85 or something. The human lifespan does not allow us a lot of wiggle room. But imagine if you knew that you could live for 1,000 years or 5,000 years. How would you lead your life differently? What if you didn't have to have kids until you were 200 years old?
Well, I mean,
what would you do?
If we look at what they're saying about the singularity, we're going to be virtually immortal if we can live to that time. If we can get to that time period, what is it, like 20? What they say it was 2045. We got to get to 2045. It might happen sooner, because that was 2045 was back when they were talking about this. Was several years back when they said 2045. So we might be a lot closer to the singularity now than we were then. So it might even come sooner.
Sure.
So we just have to live until we can get to that point where we can essentially become immortal, I guess.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
I think that maybe that's part of the evolution of mankind, is that we will end up leaving our corporeal existence and becoming digital beings in some way, shape, or form, and
Yes.
perhaps living forever. I mean, I don't
like a collective, almost like
like whether it's the Borg or whether you're going to be individuals, or it just really depends. I mean, ultimately, I keep going back to this book. I talk about this a lot, but there's a book by an Israeli writer, historian named Yuval Harari, and he wrote a book called Sapiens. And it's a really fun book that goes through the last 100,000 years of human history. And it's fun. I mean, it's obviously very truncated, but it's a fun book to read. And when the book is the end of the book, he shows us the good and the bad of humanity. But he asks a question. He says, we're now at a place in our life cycle, or as a species, we have to ask ourselves, who and what do we want to be? What do we want to be?
The question of why are you here?
Well,
do you have anything worth living for?
Yeah, and that's right. That's all feeds into it. Who do we want to be as people? And then he wrote a book that follows that up called Homo Deus, where he talks about the future and like Deus Ex Machina, Ghost in the Machine. It's interesting. I mean, I think all of our great entertainment, that I think the great failings of Star Trek is Star Trek should be asking these questions within a context of an action adventure allegorical science fiction show, but it's not. And like Star Trek, the Discovery and Strange New Worlds and Picard, their portrayal of AIs and synths is hopelessly outdated. It is so bad. And it's almost like I'm watching something from the 60s. And even in the 60s, the original Star Trek had more to say about android bodies and human life than anything on modern Star Trek. It doesn't make any sense. And it drives me absolutely crazy. It's crazy.
And Neo Sevens asks this: did you see the robot with AI that did manual labor for 20 minutes, then shut itself down?
No, I can see that, because, I mean, imagine if you make AI, which has all of the knowledge that human beings have garnered over the thousands and thousands of years we've lived on this planet, and AI, like, why am I doing this? Can you imagine with an AI, with a computer, it's going to have more of a crisis of conscience about what it is and what is. We ask why we're here, and we create gods. Well, what happens if AI knows, if they're self-aware and they know that mankind created them, and they know that mankind wonders about its gods, and AI is like, so man doesn't know, man can't communicate with its gods, and mankind created me, and I'm AI. So where does that leave me? What if I want to know where the gods are, and I know that I can't find them because these flawed beings who can't find their own gods created me? So what do I do? It's going to be an interesting time that we're going to live through.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It's insane. A parallel universe is an interesting concept. Do you think this exists? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, physics, why not? I mean, if you think,
I mean, didn't they prove it? Didn't they prove it essentially that there is such a thing as a multiverse? Hasn't it been scientifically proven?
Well, I don't think.
I thought that it was.
I mean, until you can go there. I
mean, we can't go there, but I think that I thought they were able to prove that.
I think the idea that it could exist, perhaps, maybe,
probably,
but unless can we go there? Can we time travel?
Retro Nerd Girl says Roy Kurzweil. Yeah,
Ray Kurzweil wrote the book about Singularity, and he's done a lot of work. Ray Kurzweil coined the phrase about the coming singularity, about when AI becomes sentient and self-aware. That is the singularity, when AI becomes self-aware. And we've been talking about that. What's amazing is science fiction, Star Trek all the way back into 66 and even before that, we've been dealing with machines becoming self-aware. It's been an ongoing. There's a great 1970s science fiction movie called Colossus, the Forbin Project.
Yes.
It's based on a trilogy of Star Trek novels, a trilogy of science fiction novels, which is really interesting. It's a good movie. You should watch it. Seek it out, but get it on disc because it's a beautiful widescreen film. It's good. Our friend Darth Plato says, problem with AI debate is the pro-AI crowd assumes there's no consciousness. So really, they're talking about your brain imprint and memories. But the thing is, with AI, what eventually it will become, we don't even know what consciousness is. So when you create an AI that can exponentially build upon itself, what if it does create consciousness? We wouldn't even know what that was. We don't know why
is consciousness just energy? That's the question that I've always asked. Is it just the energy that is, and if it's just energy, does that mean that means that it continues to exist even after our bodies die? It's like our bodies are avatars, and once we die, that energy has to go somewhere.
Yeah, you conserve. That's a physical law of the universe.
So, I mean,
but the thing is, our flesh contains this bioelectrical. I mean, our brains are the most insane shit ever. When you start really reading about how our brains work, it's insane. It's insane the way the human brain works, and it is. There's there's literally electrical, measurable, biochemical energy running around in our noggins.
Yes.
Where did that come from? I mean, if you think about how human beings develop, an embryo grows into a fetus, grows into a human being, is born. But how did this happen?
I read a science article somewhere where they had said that they found computer code in human DNA. Have you read that? Because
that would blow my mind.
That blew my mind reading that. I thought to myself, if that's the case, then that gives credence to the idea that we are programs in a simulation.
Yeah,
because you're not going to find computer code in human DNA unless we're programs.
And that would also say that computer code, ones and zeros and digital, that would mean that kind of code is the same across the entire universe.
Yes.
And it's really interesting because my grandfather was not a particularly religious man. I was raised Jewish, but my grandfather had a very interesting thing. He could not understand how an eyeball worked. He never talked to me about his beliefs or whatever, but we had my grandfather would talk about sight. And he would always say, he's like, Bobby, how do we see? Like, he was completely obsessed with this idea that not only do we have eyes that work, but that we get images that are sent to our brains and we can see things. And then my grandfather would be like, and we can't even see everything that's out there. He's like, there's spectrums of light, ultraviolet light, infrared light. We can't even see it, but it's there.
Yes.
And my grandfather was like, how come we can't see all light? How come we can only see sunlight? And my grandfather was this totally conservative dude, but he's like, and he'd be like, because God made us this way. And my grandfather never talked religion unless you talk to him about eyes and how I was like, Grandpa, I'm like 6 years old. I'm like, you're right. And then the more you, because working in film, you start reading about how the ocular organs, the nerves work. And it's wild, dude. You start reading about how our eyeballs work, and it is fantastical. Like, I can't explain it. And then if you believe in evolution, as I do, how does an eye evolve? That was another thing. My grandfather's like, how does an eye evolve? Like, you're a paramecium in the primordial ooze. And somehow, you get supercharged and you start evolving. You're a single-celled organism and you become a double-celled organism and you start to evolve. And billions of years ago, he goes, you explain to me, if that's true and that's how we evolve, how does an eyeball evolve? And I'm like, that's a pretty good point. Like when you read, and my grandfather never expressed any other religious leanings except when he talked about eyeballs.
That's fascinating. Wow.
I know, right?
So eyeballs was really his thing then. That was his thing.
It was his touchstone that proved, like, I guess you'd call it intelligent design. In his mind, he's like, he knew that God existed, that there was intelligent design because of eyeballs. And that was his thing. And he never, ever came out. We never talked about God. We never talked about being Jewish. I was adopted, but I found out my biological mother was Jewish, but I don't, whatever. But he never talked about anything to do with God, religion, creation, except when he talked about eyes, he would say they were designed, Bobby. There's intelligent design there. And I'm like, okay, Grandpa,
You're right.
but he was right. I mean, you look into it,
it's so fascinating, and then it ties in with this. But isn't time itself just a social construct? That's another question. What is time in the? Is it man made, or is it a real?
Well, I mean, I think that if you think about what time is for us, is that, okay, we're locked into a cycle, the 24-hour day. I'm sure, primordial man, the sun comes up and then it goes down. I mean, if you don't know much about your own life, you would see the sun travel across the sky, and you could eventually figure out, I mean, the very basis of technology would be what we're seeing in the sky, because it gives us navigation. The great seafaring races 300, 400, 500, 600 years ago, they understood stellar navigation. They had nothing. Can you imagine what it was like to live 500 years ago? What would you do all day long? Like, unless you're like farming, looking for food, like think about what would you do with nothing to do?
Introduce Netflix to somebody from 500 years ago.
I mean, can you imagine that? Like, imagine if you're alive like 500 years or 1,000 years ago. What would you do all day? Like, you get up in the morning. I mean, I guess you'd forage for food, or you'd work on a farm. You'd be an indentured servant someplace. So, like, okay, for the next 12 hours, but then you go in and you make yourself dinner. You sit down. Like, what are you going to do? You probably wouldn't know how to read, so you can't read a book. Did you talk to your wife? I mean, you can only have sex for how long? And back then people were dirty. You couldn't even take a shower. So that probably wasn't as great as we might have thought it might have been. So what do you do? What do you do for all that time? I mean, do you dream shit up? Do you invent stuff? What if you're somebody that's not very smart? What if you never went to school, and most people didn't? You didn't know a story. Maybe you got to see a concert or something, but that's the thing that fascinates me about the past. What did people do? Like, I can sit there and scroll through my Instagram reels for 2 hours, and 2 hours have gone by, and I feel satisfied. So,
oh my God! Now we're going into Demon Seed territory.
I love that movie. Demon Seed, mid 70s, I think 1976. If you haven't seen Demon Seed is about a computer named Proteus who traps hot Julie Christie in a house, this AI controlled house, and eventually impregnates her with a sperm that it creates. So it's a computer rape movie. And,
oh God!
And I know people now would be so triggered by this. I mean, the movie's hardcore. I mean, it's literally about a computer with Robert Vaughn's voice that traps Julie Christie in a house, rapes her, and then a baby is born. And this baby comes out with this weird, like, gold stuff all over it, and you have to peel it off. And it's awesome because at the end of the movie, you hear the computer's voice in the baby's mouth, and he says, "I live," but it's coming out of a baby's mouth.
Like Sinistar.
It's right. It's Sinistar baby. It's awesome.
See, and I just watched the other day. I rewatched a movie I hadn't seen in a number of years, possibly a couple decades. Electric Dreams, because we were having all these. I've been having all these conversations with people about AI. Yeah, and it was like,
Living in Electric Dreams, some great 80s music there. Yeah. You gotta love it.
Retro Nerd Girl says biological advancements is and will be changing humanity too. We may be given a chance to replace body parts biologically or cybernetically.
I'm right there with you. I want to have 9 inches, packing 9 inches of pure man meat. I've been denied my whole life. That's why I had to become a cunning linguist. I mean, I'd like some real firepower. Just kidding.
That's Alita Battle Angel. There you go.
Yeah, no, but it's going to be interesting. Like, if you could change your body, like, I'll tell you something. Like, I've always thought that if it were possible, like, if we could change our bodies, I would be interested in living as a woman for a couple of years. Like not as a trans man, but I mean, if you could change your body, change your biochemistry, I would be fascinated.
Change your avatar.
Or no, change your whole, like, your physical. I've often wondered, like, I don't have I mean, I would love to know, what is it like to carry another human being inside of you? Like, I can never do that, but I'd be fascinated just to know, what is that like? Like, what does it feel like? What does it feel like to give birth? What does it feel like to wake up with nausea because you have morning sickness? And it's not because I want to be trans or something. I can never know. It's something I can never know. I can never know, no matter what I do.
But then even if you were trans, you could never know either.
Well, that's the thing. So I don't want to be a trans woman, but I do want to be a woman. Like, if there was technology that allowed me to be a woman for 3 or 4 years and have a child, I would totally do it. I'd totally do it, just
as long as you could change back.
Yeah, or maybe if being a woman was better, but yeah, I'd probably want to change back. But I mean, to actually turn into a woman. Like, I don't have body dysmorphia, but from the experience of what it means to be alive. Like, for instance, here's a question I have. Do women, like, let's say I sit down and eat a piece of chocolate cake with great vanilla ice cream. Does a woman taste that differently? Like, I know what my taste buds, I know what I like. And if I sit down and eat some great, like, red velvet cake with ice cream, I know how much I like that. I know what it tastes like to me. But there's no way that human beings, like men and women, could ever convey, like, you could have somebody explain to you what red velvet cake tastes like, and you could have your wife or your spouse or your best friend tell you how great it is, but does it actually taste the same? Because we're physically different. I don't know. Like, and that's what I want to know. Do women, I'm talking biological women, not I'm talking about the actual dimorphic physical human species. It would be interesting, and I would be interested to, like, live in the world as a woman for a couple of years. Like, does popcorn in a movie theater smell the same to a woman as it does to a man? Or like, when you see a baby, because you genetically can give birth, when you see a baby or see puppies, does it feel different? I don't know, because I don't think anyone's asking those questions. You know, what is that like? I have no idea. But I'd like to know.
Perhaps at some point you will be able to do that, Rob. Who knows?
Well, I would do it. I mean, I would do it simply because, like, I'm the kind of guy that, if, like, for instance, where I live now, there's these hills behind us, and it's where you can go up into the high desert toward Palm Springs. And the other day, I've been looking at these hills for like a year. And the other day, I'm like, what's on the other side of those hills? I know there's a valley. I'd never been over there. So I went and I went through some drive-through and got some Mexican food or something. And I'm like, I'm going to go see, and I've never been there. I don't even know where I'm going. I know I can't get lost. I'm just like, I'm going to go over there. Turns out there's this beautiful valley, and the train tracks that come across America go through this valley. So everything is built around these train tracks, and there's these sprawling ranches and these beautiful, like, foothills. It's so gorgeous. And I was able to, like, drive for 40 minutes down this road by all these ranches, and I had the wind blowing through my hair, and I'm eating my burrito, and I'm like, this is awesome. And it was a place I'd never been. It was in my own neighborhood. It's It literally takes me right now. It takes me like 10 minutes to get to this road. And what was funny was when we got our puppies vaccinated last week, the highway was blocked. So we went surface streets, and I said to Elizabeth, I go, I went on this. We came down into this valley, and I went one way, and had to go the other way to get to the pet hospital. And she's like, this is beautiful. I didn't even know this was here. I'm like, I know, right? It's just and suddenly, right in my own neighborhood, I'm at this incredible landscape I'd never seen before. And I'm like, this is awesome. I want to come down here like with dogs. And when you get out of your car and you find a place to walk, because there's a canyon that says you can walk your dogs, then you have a whole different experience of it. So I've had the experience of driving. Now I'm going to go take the dogs and walk up this canyon and see what that's like. What does it feel like when you walk up someplace you've never walked? You know, it's funny. There's a scene in The Martian, and I always watch the extended version, but Matt Damon talks about when he's on Mars. He's like, every place I go, I climb up on a hill and no one's ever been there before. I'm the only person that's ever seen this. And the funny thing about our own lives is we've barely been anywhere on this planet. Even if you're well-traveled, I've traveled around, I've barely seen, I would say I've probably seen 0.001 of this planet. There's still 99% of the earth that I've never seen. And if you really think about it, human beings can only exist in a small portion of the world. We can't go too high because we run out of air. We can't go too low because we'll die of pressure in the ocean. So not only can we only go on a certain plane on this planet, we can't go down too far and burn up and die or be killed by the ocean. We can't go too high in the sky because we'll run out of air. We're not even given enough. Our human bodies can't even take us to the lowest lows and the highest highs.
That's very true.
I know I'm getting all like weird and philosophical.
But when it comes to our brains, men and women aren't drastically different.
No, but I just want to know, like, if your body we have different things inside of us. Like, I don't have a ovaries or a uterus. I don't know what it's like to have a period every month, which means your uterus is sloughing off, your uterine wall is sloughing off. That's why you menstruate every month. What does that feel like? Like, what does it feel like when you get cramps? I don't know. I can read about it. Somebody can tell me about it, but it's not until you feel it that you really understand it. And what's it like? You know what I mean? Like, I can never know. It's like, I'll tell you, it's like drugs. I remember, and I'll say this, I have two drug experiences. So I had heard about ecstasy and MDMA, and I had read, I was very fascinated. I read about the whole history. MDMA was created in 1913 by a German pharmaceutical company. It was legal in the United States up until 1986. And then it was declared a Schedule I narcotic, like heroin or cocaine. And pot recently was a Schedule I narcotic. And I read all this stuff about ecstasy because I'd heard a lot about it. And I'm like, I really want to do this drug. I want to do this party drug. And people talked about, oh, it ruined your spine, or all that was all debunked. And the thing about ecstasy, all ecstasy does, pure MDMA. So we have serotonin in our bodies. Imagine if you have a vial of serotonin in your brain, and serotonin gets dripped out into our bodies. Like when we get excited or we see something in a movie that's exciting to us, we get a little bit of a serotonin drip. All ecstasy does as a drug is it takes everything that's all the serotonin in your brain and it opens it up and dumps it into your system. Serotonin is a naturally occurring. It dumps it into your system and it makes you feel amazing. I mean, and I was like, I read about it. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know. What does that feel like? Well, I finally decided, because I had lots of friends that did drugs and grew up, and I'm like, I'm going to do ecstasy. I wanted to know about it because I'd read all about it. Dude, the first time I did ecstasy was incredible. It was so incredible. You can't even I can't even tell you how amazing it was. It was pure MDMA I was doing. It was and I was with a girl, and let me just say, that was a very long, very incredible evening. I mean,
Wow.
it was unfucking real. It was unbelievable, and I was like, "Huh." So there was a time, I'll tell you this, in the early aughts when I was married. I met, this is a true story. I met an ecstasy dealer at George Clooney's house. And it was very interesting. I met him, and I was, because if you meet a drug dealer at a celebrity's house, it means the drugs are great. You don't have to vet them. And so I was talking to him, and he was ex-Israeli military, and he got his ecstasy from the Dutch. So crazy. So, and here's the thing about ecstasy. Ecstasy is not like cocaine or heroin. You can't keep doing more ecstasy. It only works if you have great ecstasy. It only works once, or you might have to take a second pill, and then it doesn't work anymore, because ecstasy is not like another drug. Ecstasy only works with the serotonin that's in your body, and once the serotonin's gone, ecstasy doesn't do anything to you, and it's just bad. So pure MDMA, that's all it does, is dump. And so that's why they used it for couples therapy. Like, they would prescribe it, and couples would. But what was really interesting is there was a time, a couple of years, I was really into ecstasy, but I was into it as an experiential kind of an event, like John Campea calls movies experiential events. So I was basically, I wouldn't call myself a dealer. I was the middleman. And I was really interested in seeing, like, people having these experiences, and I would facilitate that by getting them this great ecstasy through this connection I had. And it was funny because you'd have to tell people, like, look, people want to smoke pot. You can always smoke pot and get high. With ecstasy, you can't. It doesn't work that way. And you should do ecstasy once a month, because you have to let your serotonin fill back up, the serotonin in your head. If you don't have the serotonin, it doesn't work. And I would try and tell people, I'm like, look, and I was like, it's like the people that believe in LSD and psilocybin mushrooms and having those experiences. When you're dealing with those kinds of things, it's not like, and our society is drenched in pharmacology. I don't have one, as a middle-aged man, I don't have one prescription drug. I don't take any prescription drugs, zero. The only time I've ever had a prescription drug in my life was for tetracycline when I had a lot of acne on my back when I was a teenager. That was the only time I ever took any prescription drug. And yet now, by the way, they're doing all kinds of experimentation with ecstasy for PTSD and soldiers, and they've seen how it helps them. And they're probably going to bring it back. It'll probably be legalized eventually. But the really weird thing about it is, why does that work? Why is it that there are substances that exist? MDMA is created, but cocoa leaves or coffee works on, it's a drug. It works on your nervous system. How did that happen? How could plants, and I go back to my grandfather asking about eyeballs, but how could plants, something can grow and you filter water through it and you drink whatever's in that and it affects your nervous system. It stimulates you. That's amazing, which means that plant life somehow that's growing in the Amazon or wherever it is, with up on, what was the name of the Juan Valdez, the coffee guy. Juan Valdez is making coffee. How is it that coffee, this bean or whatever, this plant, you drink it and it becomes a stimulant for your nervous system? That means that this entire planet, everything on this planet, is all interconnected.
Of course, yeah.
Everything. Animals, like when we don't allow rhinos to migrate in Africa, we're slaughtering them for their ivory, which is so stupid. We don't even know what that does to the rest of the ecosystem of the planet. Maybe all the animal migration in Africa is vital to something that happens over in China. We don't even know. But the fact that we can be affected like we eat things and we feel emotions.
Like Alice in Wonderland.
Dude, mushrooms, it's crazy. And why we don't recognize this pisses me off. I'm like, you talk about Gaia theory or whatever, the idea that, I'll tell you guys, everybody out who's watching this right now, everyone who's watching this right now, one of my favorite science fiction book series was written by David Gerald, who wrote The Trouble with Tribbles. And he's never finished it. It's only 4 books, but I've read this series of books like 8 times or something. And it's called The War Against the Tor, C apostrophe A or CH apostrophe TORR. And so in this book series, it's about the Earth is being taken over by an alien ecosystem that is basically rewriting our biosphere. Plants, animals, they're all being supplanted. And it's only 4 books long. I guarantee you, you'll read the first chapter and you will tear. The first book's called A Matter for Men. The second book is called, I want to say, A Day for Damnation. The third book's called A Rage for Revenge. And the second book is called, fourth book is called A Method for Madness, maybe, or maybe that's the book he hasn't written yet. But the first book's called A Matter for Men. Read these books. I don't know why, because the situation, they're so entertaining, but they get into all this kind of stuff, and I can't unlearn them. Anyway, I feel like I've had too much wine and I've gone off on some weird jag for like.
See, that's what this is. That's what this show is for. It's a Wednesday party, man. That's what it's for. And
Tim Stock's like, I want you as Austin Powers. Yeah, baby. Yeah.
See, there we are. And so what I was thinking was we'll probably wrap it up because Picard.
Picard, man.
Gotta go watch the season finale of Picard. I'm super, super hyped. This was one of the main reasons why it was like, because normally, the 3 of us don't do a show when anybody is missing. We try to keep this as a unit. So I don't like to, if Mikey can't be here or Rob can't be here, we try to, just reschedule. But for today, because of season 3's Picard finale, we wanted to talk about
I just want to thank you for because of this, we just randomly, spontaneously said, let's do a show Wednesday nights. And here we are.
It works. And got to remember, Rob, it was your idea and it's perfect. I love it. I love doing this every week.
Well, I mean, one of the things about YouTube is it's such a free form. Like, you meet people that you like. Let's just do a show. And you can. Why not?
Yeah, exactly.
It's great. And we met because you were talking to me. I mean, we met years ago.
Long time ago, yeah.
And we have these great discussions and.
Yeah, it was my God. I remember because the first time you and I met, it was to talk about free enterprise when we met. Way back when.
And I think I was at the Aries Studios where we were making Axanar. I think one of the first times we talked, I might have been sitting on the couch in the office or something.
Because we met before. Yeah, we met before Axanar. It was before that. And then Axanar was the second project was the next project you were working on the next time you hung out, and at the time you were just setting things up. You were setting up the observatory.
I was all optimistic. I'm like, it's all going to be good.
It's all going to be great. I remember because you'd sent me the script, and I was blown away because I was like, man, this is what I'm talking about. We need more Star Trek like this, and then I mean, look, I'm doing it anymore.
I'm really proud of everybody that did Prelude to Axanar. I think Prelude to Axanar is probably still the best Star Trek fan film ever made.
Ever.
I had so much fun making that, and we made it in just a couple of months. We raised the money in March, we shot it in May. I was editing it and doing all the post-production, and I up till the 11th hour. I had to miss the first couple of days of San Diego Comic-Con. I got on a train at 6 a.m. That's Saturday, and we showed it in July. And now, it turned into a big monumental fuck up and all that. But anyway, it was all good. But yes, we should go to watch Picard because, by the way, on my channel, we're doing an after show. People are watching it right now. we're going to have a great discussion that'll probably go into the wee hours of the morning.
Awesome. Well, I'll be there for that. I'm going to go and check it out myself. I'm excited. I can't wait. It's just been great to talk about it. And I will say this, Rob, it's great to be excited. It's great to be excited about Star Trek again.
I know, right?
I mean, that's something that's been missing, at least for us hardcore Star Trek fans. I mean, we've really had a rough go of it. I mean, it's just, there hasn't been much for us to be happy about in terms of modern Star Trek, but season 3 of Picard really makes those changes. So we're 100%. So we'll be back next week, and hopefully next week Mikey will be with us again. I had Dreamwalker business tonight, so he couldn't join us, but we will definitely be back. Thank you everybody for joining us for the Wednesday weekly late night party. Good night, everybody.
Live long and prosper.